Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Army Facebook Live. I'm Hank Manitres, live from the Pentagon, for today's great session on the Army People Strategy, building cohesive teams ready to win. Joining me on the panel today, and we think we've put together the best panel for you to talk about not just the officer side and the enlisted side, but also the civilian side. But joining me this afternoon, sort of the father of modern Army talent management, as it were, the Assistant Secretary of the Army, the Honorable Dr. Casey Wardynski, is here this afternoon. Representing the civilian component of the United States Army, we have the Director from the Civilian Human Resource Agency, Senior Executive Service Corps member, Ms. Carol Burton, is here with us this afternoon. And representing arguably the largest part of our population in the United States Army, the enlisted force, Sergeant Major Wardell Jefferson. He is the G-1 Sergeant Major. He provides advice on behalf of the entire enlisted force on all things personnel related to the Army G-1, Lieutenant General Tom Siemens. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. Very historic. First time in our Army's history we've had an actual people strategy. We've always talked about mission first, people always. We've had it on paper, but this is the first time we have an actual strategy signed by the Secretary of the Army and the Chief of Staff of the Army. What I'd like to do is just for the next 45 minutes or so, we'll have a conversation about it.
Terrific.
And we will explain to our viewers the importance of it and how it touches each and every person in the Army. Sir, I'd like to start with you. I mentioned that you're sort of the father of modern Army talent management. The reason I say that is because way back when you were in uniform, pre-9/11, talent management was really your idea.
Well, a lot of people have been working on it, Hank, and it did begin a good while ago. We've had great leaders like our current chief, General McConville. He worked on it a good bit when he was G1, and then as vice, I think he was crystallizing his ideas about what he'd like to do when he was chief. And we had General Semonite, who's chief of engineers. He'd worked this area a good bit. Of course, General McGee, our current talent management leader. But this has been a good long gestation. It began just before 9/11. We were looking at the trends in society and what we were seeing with regard to retaining our officers and how the economy was evolving, and really began by focusing on efforts to retain talent in the Army. And as we went down that road, by 2006, it was clear that the things we were doing to retain talent were working, but the things we were doing, many of them were building talents at graduate school and other places, and we wanted to understand those. So when the officers came back to our formations, we'd able to put those new gifts to work at the right time and the right place so we could really leverage what they had learned. And so over that period, a lot of thinking went into talent management, and in the following years, a lot of effort went into taking an idea and actually turning it into activity, and today, policy.
That's right. We have now a signed Army People Strategy. So just sort of in a nutshell, overarching talk, what is the Army People Strategy?
Well, any organization, you got key things you have to achieve, and one is allocating resources. A budget is a financial statement of priorities. Well, before you build that, you really ought to have the statement of priorities, which is your strategy. And so whether you're a corporate entity, a government entity, that strategy, which crystallizes vision, is a key document because it helps everybody understand where you're going. It helps them understand sort of what order we're going to get there and what pathway we're going to take. And then with that, you can line up the resources to make that happen. So by having General McConville, and our Secretary McCarthy, and Sergeant Major of the Army, Grinston, sign that document, it's very clear that all our senior leaders are lined up. They have a common vision. They have a pretty good idea where we're headed, how we're going to get there, what pathways we're going to take. And then that plays a key role in allocating the resources too, to enable all that to take place.
It's one thing to have it on paper, quite another to have it resourced.
That's right.
And provide the framework. So Ms. Burton, I'd like to come over to you now and talk about how what you're doing in the civilian human resources arena is aligning with the Army People Strategy.
Sure. So with the release of the Army People Strategy, we now have, for the first time ever, a roadmap on how to build the 21st century civilian talent management process. And from a strategic perspective, the civilian implementation plan revolves around 4 lines of effort: employ, acquire, develop, and retain. And as the CHRA director, I am the lead integrator for acquire. So we've already implemented a host of initiatives, from standardized position descriptions to expedited referral list. We've streamlined the security clearance process, the drug testing process. So we've already gotten started. We're really excited about the Army People Strategy. And again, this is brand new. We've never done this before, Hank. This is cool.
No, it is very cool. It's revolutionary, I think. You know, having worn the uniform and how assignments were done when I was a soldier, and now that I'm a Department of the Army civilian, how my talent is being managed, which is incredible. Which brings me to Sergeant Major Wardell Jefferson. Sergeant Major, again, we've done some limited things on the officer front. We've had ATAP, the Army Talent Alignment Process. We've had the Battalion Commander Assessment Program. And the reason we did that was because that's a smaller population that we can sort of test all of this out on. But eventually we're going to start seeing some things on the enlisted side. And we have had some enlisted initiatives. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. Hank, we've had a lot of initiatives that have been done at HRC, our Human Resources Command. Some of the things that they're doing right now is they're running a pilot marketplace for our 19 Delta and 19 Kilo soldiers. So basically what happens is when those soldiers come into their zone of movement, when they can PCS, they can go into ASA, the Assignment Satisfaction Key, and we're calling the enlisted market right now, and they can look and see all the assignments that are available for them to move at that time. In the past, there was only 6 options. You had 3 that you can select on the CONUS side and 3 OCONUS for you to go overseas, and that really wasn't giving soldiers choices. So now, anything that's available during that time, they get to see everything. They can rank order those assignments based off of discussions they have with their families and their families' needs. Another big thing that we're doing is right now the Army Talent Management Task Force is in the process of doing their second talent management planning conference here in DC at the Mark Center. And during that conference, they're going to talk about other initiatives that they're going to bring into the listed side. So it's definitely a culture change. I've been in the Army for over 30 years, never seen this much work being put into the way we manage our talent, especially on the enlisted side. So it's exciting times right now.
No, it is exciting. And believe it or not, even as recent as a year ago, we rolled out the centralized, enlisted centralized selection boards, which is also a tool of talent management on the enlisted side. How's that been going?
Absolutely. It's been great. We're getting a lot of great feedback. We went from a time-based selection to an order merit-based list. So now when we're looking at these promotion boards and the board members are ranking the soldiers based off the strength of their records and the things that they've done in the Army, they remain in that order of merit list. So basically, if you're a young soldier and you're doing everything we need you to do in the Army and you're doing great things, and the board says you're the #1 soldier, you're going to remain that #1 soldier. You're not going to fall to the bottom because you're young in the Army and somebody that's been in longer than you based off our time-based selection is going to jump you.
So more talent-based versus time-based.
Exactly.
I'm an E6, I got 12 years in, you're an E6, you got 5 years in or 6 years in, but you were just tearing it up. You were doing some great things where maybe I'm coasting, and now leadership is looking at that and saying, wait a minute, we should probably promote the guy that's really invested in his career versus the guy that's coasting.
Absolutely.
Not that everybody's coasting, but you know, it's the best example I could come up with.
Exactly. That's a
Thank
good
you,
example.
Sergeant Major.
Thank you.
What I'd like to do is talk a little bit more with you, Ms. Burton, because we're getting questions in from our audience viewing in. And invite everybody to keep submitting your questions in the comments section. We do have people who are behind the scenes that will help answer via comment, but they're also passing some to us here in the studio so that we can have a discussion. So Ms. Burton, can you talk about the Army Civilian Internship Programs? Where are they and how do we find out about them?
Sure. The Army Civilian Internship Program is a program where we hire at the entry level, and it's primarily based on education. So depending on the level of education, it could be a GS5, a GS7, or even a GS9. And we typically use this program to hire in occupations. We call it a 2-grade interval. It's a position that requires some analytical thought. So budget analysts, engineers, IT, human resource professionals. So it's a mechanism to hire people based primarily on their education at the entry level. They then complete a very structured program of specific assignments and projects, and then at regular intervals they receive promotions. So for example, if you were hired at the GS5, after completing certain projects or assignments, then you'd be progressed to the GS7 and the GS9, and it only requires competition at the entry level. And we use that widely in the Army, and you can find out more information by Googling USA Jobs.
Ah, that makes total sense. Well, sir, I'd like to talk about a little more in depth the Army People Strategy. Ms. Burton hit on it a little bit on the civilian side, but surprisingly, the 4 lines of effort that she follows are identical to the 4 lines of effort that you've outlined in the People Strategy.
Right. It's not an accident. It falls out of the Army strategy. So, as you know, we've got key documents that guide the Army with regard to installations, procurement, the whole process of building an Army. And so we're nested underneath the Army strategy in keeping with the Army vision. And we identified 4 lines of effort that would be the way we would proceed into the future. One is acquire. We want to acquire talent, and that's our main line of effort. And I'll come back to just why that is. 2 is develop. So we're always developing our folks, civilians, military, officers enlisted, Guard, Active Reserve. Next would be employ. That's the business about the ATAP, as you were talking about, the Army Talent Alignment Process.
Yes, sir.
The things Sergeant Major was talking about. Finding the right person, the right time, the right position to sort of unleash the most important thing, which is their interests. When you're interested about doing something, it always goes much better. And then retain. We want to retain our talent too, and do it in a very purposeful way. So down the line here, as these systems come online, ATAP is fully implemented within the IPSA system, the pay and assignment system, that will have the ability to, at some point when a soldier might be leaving active duty, we could open up that system and the Guard and Reserve could see that soldier and offer them positions in the Guard and Reserve. The civilian side of the Army could open up and offer positions in the civilian side of the Army and perhaps government-wide to help that individual as they off-board from the Army onboard to their next career. Because we know young people are more interested in lifetime employability than maybe previous generations were interested in lifetime employment. And so offering these pathways and technologies to let them have that employability, development to do it, jobs that build their skills is key to our strategy. Returning back to acquire, you don't have a lot of lateral entry in an Army. This is an organization where culture really matters. And culture is one of our key enablers. And we have a very strong culture that's a service-oriented culture, speaks to things like honor and integrity, leadership, selflessness, and country. And so those things you kind of build from bottom up, because folks come from all walks of life. We have people that come into America and they may not be a citizen, but they've already joined the Army, and the Army could be a pathway to citizenship. We've got people that have been here a long time. Some of that may already be secondhand to them, right? And they know it very well.
Sure.
But when you don't have a lot of opportunities for lateral entry, which we don't by design, it's pretty important you get it right from the start. And so the people we bring in today will be our sergeant majors in 20 years. The officers we bring in today from ROTC, West Point, OCS will be our chiefs of staff, our senior leaders in 20, 30 years. We can't break faith with the next generations by not paying attention to this business every day. So acquire is something we have to worry about every day. We've got to do a great job every day because any gaps will show up down the line. And I have kids in the Army.
That's right.
Many of us do.
Sure.
And as a parent, you know, I expect the Army to do its utmost to make sure my children are well led and well equipped and well trained. And that leading part is the Sergeant Major's business, General McConville's business, and making sure we've got the best people. Doing that is the first thing we need to do to keep faith with mom and dad back home when they send us their kids. So acquire is vital. It transpires at places like West Point, ROTC on campuses across America, and in Recruiting Command, and of course in similar organizations in the National Guard for our enlisted force. And so the business of who we bring on board has to be very well thought through. That's why we have soldiers doing recruiting, not contractors. A recruiter who's been around the Army for a while, it's typically E6, E7, who's led by captains and lieutenant colonels. They have a pretty good idea what a soldier looks like. And they've got buddies that understand what soldiers might look like in different parts of the Army. There's lots of ways to be a soldier, but they share some very common things.
Sure.
So they can spot those common things, you know, that they're fit, they're disciplined, and they're ready to be well trained because that makes a cohesive team, that group there. And every organization needs cohesive teams, which is a key outcome we seek. So these recruiters, these officers at West Point or ROTC have the ability to spot fit. They're looking for a good fit between the young individual and the requirements of service and the benefits of service. And so that's pivotal work right there. And so acquire is main effort and likely will always be our main effort. We don't see it switching. We bring in about 5,000 new officers a year, about 70,000 new soldiers a year in the active force, somewhat smaller numbers in the Guard and Reserve. And when you're bringing in that many folks, you can't take your eye off the ball. And so acquire is number one.
Sergeant Major, do you want to add anything to that?
I would just say, talking about development, that's a very important aspect as well, and that's something that we're looking at, in all aspects, enlisted, civilian, as well as the officer corps, because once you acquire those individuals, you got to develop them and give them the skills and the training that they need in order to be successful in the Army.
You got to set them up for success. Right?
Exactly.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. Well, I'd like to just sort of brag a little bit about some recent results that were released by the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. So on the civilian side of things, we are the 7th best place amongst large federal agencies to work.
Wow, that's great.
That's phenomenal.
That's great.
And of course, we're number 1 amongst DoD services. So just saying. But any comment to that? To me, that just shows that we're headed in the right direction. Even though we just had the People Strategy signed in this past fall, we're already there. And I can only imagine how much better it's going to be. Anything I think that you could add might talk to the fact that we've been paying more attention to the civilian side than ever before.
Sure.
We've been trying to reduce the time to hire, because that's always been one of the difficulties. Let's say you've got a soldier who's got a spouse that has a certain skill set that we could use as a DA civilian, but by the time they get moved in at their new station, it could take 6-8 months, so many months or days to get hired, and then go through the process, get the job, and then all of a sudden it's time to PCS again. And I know that can probably be frustrating. So what are some things that your agency has done to address that?
So I already mentioned some of the initiatives that we've deployed, and I want to mention some of the reduction and the processing time. So in first quarter fiscal year 20, considering that we're now using direct hire authorities and non-competitive appointing authorities, our hiring time's down to less than 80 days. And it was as high as 130 days.
That's amazing.
So the data shows that what we're doing is working. We're continuing to reduce the processing time with things like, I mentioned, the streamlined vetting process for security clearances. So what that means is that for most occupations, we can onboard applicants as long as there's no derogatory information with just the FBI fingerprint check, and that comes back in about 24 hours. We used to wait weeks and sometimes months. Right. We're also piloting at some locations a new method to onboard individuals who require a pre-employment drug test. And this pilot is testing a new process where we can onboard the applicant after the drug test, but before the results are received. That usually takes several weeks. And we know that, that less than 1% of the applicants come back positive on a drug test. So it's low risk, but still we want to be careful. That's kind of an important pre-employment condition.
Sure.
So we're piloting it at 2 locations. So we're doing lots of different things. We've got lots of pilots going on, and we're committed to trying to improve the process and reduce the hiring time.
That's excellent news right there. Now, what about the spouses overseas? How do you address that?
Sure. So we have, in our overseas area, of course, it's rather unique. They have a very deliberate applicant pool. They don't have the demographic that we have here in the States in terms of finding applicants to do the important work that we do in the Army. So we, at certain OCONUS locations, we've limited how we recruit. So rather than accepting applicants from everyone all over the world, we've zeroed in on where we know we can find the best applicant, and that's generally in the local area and military spouses. So we're piloting that new process in the Far East. We required an exception to an Army policy, and we got it. We asked for it and we got it. The Army's committed to trying to do different things.
Excellent.
And as a result of that, we've hired a huge we've seen a huge increase in the employment of military spouses in the Far East. We're still assessing the data, and then we'll look at expanding it to other locations.
That's excellent. Let's take a question from the audience now. Let's see. Sergeant Major, I think this might go to you, and Dr. Wardynski, also to you. How do we balance fast promotion rates against the value of experience? We talked about, the enlisted centralized selection boards. So your take on that?
Yeah, that's definitely a great question, and that's something that we look at every day because you're always going to have your fast trackers. You're going to have individuals that are going to get promoted very fast. Right now, currently, soldiers have about 2 years time and grade before they're looked at for the next promotion when it comes to senior enlisted promotions. But the thing is some of the things that we have done is the makeup of our promotion boards, our panel members. We ensure that we get individuals who are experienced in their CMFs and they know what they're looking for, and individuals who they're looking to promote. And you have to ensure that they've done those jobs, they've gone to the schooling, and they've been developed in order to be successful as they move forward. There haven't been a lot of negative feedback as far as soldiers getting promoted too early, but that is something that we're constantly looking at. So I think the balance that you get is ensuring you're selecting the right individuals and ensuring that you're getting those individuals into the proper assignments and school in order for them to be successful when they take on this greater responsibility.
That makes total sense. Sir, anything you want to chime in on that with?
Well, the key is the talent piece, I think. Those are skills, knowledge, behaviors, and preferences. So we have the ability for people to actually slow down now. So maybe you're an individual who's been away in an environment that wasn't purely operational. And you're going to be competing against peers who have spent a lot of operational time, and you think maybe you're not quite competitive at this moment. You can ask to slow down a little bit. And I get those requests and sign off on those every day.
Really?
And that lets you defer from one promotion board to the next. You can speed up if you want. You can solicit to move to an earlier promotion board. If you're on a promotion board, we've gone from, as the Sergeant Major was talking about, sort of a world in which it was data rank based, to one now where some or all of the list is based on order of merit ranking. So as that promotion board meets and they order the files up to some point among the officer corps, that ordering matters in terms of your promotion. So you might have been the last one promoted in your cohort to major, but you're now number 2 on the OML to become lieutenant colonel. You'll be promoted very early and not wait to sort of the date-time sequence of when you were last promoted. But I think the key thing to walk away with is the thought of individuals are pretty important. They have different experiences, they got different passions. Some, their passions may lie in an area where the promotions aren't as quick, but they love the work and they love whether it's very technical, perhaps a field like cyber or computer science, medicine, and promotion is great, but they also like the work experiences and the opportunities for development. And so what we're trying to do is build a system in which we can really bring into the focus what people would like to do as part of the Army and not what the Army would like to do to people. And so that's a very important paradigm. And really, I think they're in a pivotal time here. This is probably the most pivotal approach to people in the Army since the volunteer Army way back in the early 70s. And it's now leading probably what industry is up to. And in terms of national security, I think it gives us a huge edge. I don't believe other armies that we may bang up against are going to take this approach for a variety of reasons. One, it's not in their culture of their underlying population. In America, we're on Facebook right now, talking to folks. To be on Facebook, if you've looked at what's on there, there's a lot of stuff about you and your kids. Sure. Many people have put that stuff on there. There's an element of trust and openness in America, and that trust element is vital. So people have to have the trust that when their government has a good bit of information like you find in the Army talent alignment process, what books am I reading, where have I vacationed, what are my hobbies, all this kind of information that actually is pretty valuable, that the government will use it appropriately. And can you build that trust by changing the paradigm from we will tell you based on what we see where you ought to go work and where you ought to be assigned and what you ought to be excited about to we're going to show you the whole Army and you can talk to the whole Army about what you'd like to do and all those folks who own those jobs out there, and they can see you and you can have a good discussion about how you'd be a great fit there, and they can try to excite you about coming and joining their unit and asking you to be a part of that team. That's a very different paradigm, and one where there's a lot of trust on the table. And that kind of trust makes our country work, whether it's eBay or, electronic banking. You think of it, right?
Sure.
And so it works here. Al-Qaeda, they couldn't do this.
No.
If, you know,
No.
General Fogarty and his bunch got in their database, it'd be adios muchachos. You know,
Yes, sir. I think
so-
you're right about that. Well,
so,
you get
big
to
change.
a very important point. Of course, we just did the most recent, you know, the ATAP 2002, regarded as highly successful. You had 46%, nearly half of the soldiers who participated, 1-to-1 match. The unit wanted them, they wanted the unit. Boom. That's a recipe for success. As General Siemens likes to say, it gives them a chance to unleash their passion. Say, I really want to go work in that unit, apply my skills to what that unit's mission is.
Right.
And they're just that much more invested and more willing to be engaged with their job versus, oh, great, I got Fort Polk, you know,
Right.
and they're not so happy about that selection for whatever reason.
Yep.
We got time for another question from the audience here. Will there be more flexibility to move between the reserves and active duties? Sir, you kind of hit on this a minute ago as we looked at the IPSA.
Yep, we don't have it today, but we have to have it.
Yes.
So I think that's part of Army vision, is to be able to employ our folks where they fit best in terms of their needs and where they fit best in terms of the United States needs. And so could we envision people going from active to guard and back, or active to reserve and back, or reserve to active and back? We have some methods already to go from reserve to active. We have ADOS and other things like that. Could we see stop out and come back? I think we could. So there's a lot of opportunities that open up for us. And when you think about these opportunities, they kind of mirror modern life. We're really in an access economy today. Young folks own a car or Uber, own a vacation home or Airbnb, right? I think the Army ought to be in that same economy where I don't necessarily have to have you in my formation to take advantage of what you can bring to the table. Perhaps you could participate TDY or you could participate virtually. I only need your thoughts for a few hours tonight. Could you join me on a VTC with
Sure.
my team and help us? Because you're the expert and we'd like you to help us. Again, a capability I don't think our enemies will have, and one we're just starting to scratch away at here. So we're right now we're in the world of physical assignments, just like we have
Sure.
been for many, many years.
Sure.
But we can envision TDY, virtual, guard to active, virtual, very easy to do, right? And you think about the things we have our Guard and Reserve doing for us, Katrinas, the expertise we needed in the fight in Afghanistan and Iraq, the expertise we're going to need going forward. Huge expertise in the Guard and Reserve, and the ability for them to participate in new ways, I think, is going to be very empowering for the Army.
I think so too, sir. Sergeant Major, anything you want to throw onto
I'd
that?
just say definitely very important, and with the coming of IPSA, the Integrated Personnel Pay System Army, we will have the capability to do that for the first time. And since I've been in, we're going to be able to see all three components in the same system, so you'll be able to move them back and forth within that personnel system. So I think it's definitely going to assist us with doing that, sir.
What about on the civilian side of that, Ms. Burton?
Thank you. I was going to interject, so thank you for asking me that.
Yes, ma'am.
So in the civilian sector, to get what we call tenure, you used to have 3 years of continuous service. And because of the Army People Strategy, that rule has now changed. So we allow more flexibility where you can work for the Army for a couple of years, you can go out and work for private industry or go to school, and then you can come back, and all of that time, not the time that you were doing another assignment, but all of your Army time will count towards your tenure.
Interesting.
So you don't start the clock over.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest setbacks that I've got friends who've done that, and they've shied away from coming back to federal service just for that reason.
Absolutely.
So now they can.
Yes.
That's phenomenal. Let's take another question from the audience. What are some of the timelines for Army civilian and enlisted initiatives? Ms. Burton, you want to go first, and then Sergeant Major will follow up with you?
So we're building the Army of 2028, and we do have some very detailed timelines for specific initiatives. The Army People Strategy is a pretty big document, so there's different timelines for different initiatives, but our end game is 2028, and as we've already mentioned, we've already gotten started and got a lot of stuff done.
Excellent. Sergeant Major?
Same on the enlisted side. Right now, we're currently working on the NCO strategy for 2028. As I stated earlier, we're doing the Army Talent Management Task Force is doing their planning conference this week here in DC. So there's going to be a lot of initiatives that come out during that. Just one of our goals right now is to be able to announce some of those things during AUSA this year in October. So hopefully we can do, but also as I stated before, HRC, as well as the Talent Management Task Force. There's already some initiatives that are in place that we're working on for our enlisted force. So, you know, it's as I would state right now is you can currently look and talk to your assignment managers, and you can see some of the changes that are already being taken place. As I travel around and I do briefings to soldiers, I have soldiers in the audience that are already telling me that their assignment managers are able to tell them where they stand amongst their peers right now. We couldn't do that before. We couldn't tell you if you were ahead of your peers or behind your peers before with the information that we had. So now that we're getting more information on individuals, we're able to actually tell them where they stand. So that in itself is a plus in allowing soldiers to make decisions on where they want to be assigned, what type of schools they need to take in order to get more competitive.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a big fan of talking about things that we've already been doing, even though the People Strategy wasn't signed until this past fall. Something that I think is incredible, and we've done a little bit of media on this, is the Spouse Licensure Reimbursement Program. Big announcement came out last week that they have upped the amount that they are reimbursing spouses who, let's say they have a professional license, maybe they're a registered nurse, and they have a state certification for one state, and they are PCSing with their soldier to another state, and that state doesn't recognize the other state's license, so then the spouse has to reapply for a relicensure process, and that could cost some money. So prior to last week, I think that the top amount we were reimbursing, sir, was $500. Now we're up to $1,000. The great folks at Army Emergency Relief, big partner of the Army for a long time, they're kicking in another $1,500 that you can apply for. That you'll have to pay back over time, but the Army is giving you $1,000 to do that. And, by the way, it's no longer a stateside to stateside PCS that this applies to. Now you can come from overseas, anywhere stateside, if you need a new license. Not a new license, one that you already have that you have to be relicensed for in another state. Then you can go and get relicensed, at least have those fees reimbursed. And that's a huge chunk of money, and that's helping our civilians out quite a bit.
And I think it shows that talent management isn't just a buzzword. I mean, we're getting things done. We're getting exceptions to Army regulations, to Department of Defense regulations. This certification thing was brewing for a while, and the Army People Strategy is what helped us propel that change. So yeah, this is not a buzzword. We're doing stuff.
No, we're actually making things happen. And that, to me, that's just absolutely incredible. Let's take another question from out there. How do we transform the Army from stability operations to combat operations needed in the future? Sir, I'll let you tackle that one.
Well, obviously in my world, a part of it is making sure we've got a workforce that's nimble enough and prepared to meet those challenges of a new environment. Overall, of course, the Army lays out its vision in its vision documents, its strategy, and you can see the way ahead in those. We're talking about peer competitors or near peer competitors. That came all the way from the National Security Strategy. You'll see that being enabled in the way the Army spends its money up front and the materiel and systems that deliver. So just this morning I was working with General Garrett of ForceCom on how we will spend money on training and training systems, home station training. Probably somewhere else in this building, Dr. Jetty and General Murray were talking about the weapon systems. And the focus is a point in the future that lines up with the same point in the future for the Army People Strategy, 2028, and then beyond, probably 2035. What capabilities do we want? So right now we're sort of transferring from building readiness to sustain readiness and modernize. And we've got reform elements ongoing. So this People Strategy is really modernizing the way we approach people. In there, we're reforming some things. We're creating entirely new things. Those are the modernizing, the Army Talent Alignment process, key programs for our civilian folks. But obviously, we've got our eye on the peer competitor threat. And it lies in the East and it lies in the West. And the Army is doing things every day to prepare for those and ensure our folks overseas are ready if the blow falls on them to bring in the full brunt of the Army to meet the challenge and deter, if possible, defeat if necessary.
Sergeant Major, anything to add?
Yes.
People.
People. We have to make sure that we have the right people at the right place at the right time. And that's the key. Right now we have a shortage of NCOs throughout our formation, so we're working on a get well plan to figure out how we're going to fix that and get the individuals to school that need to get to school in order to get these promotions. So it's all the resources. The equipment is a major piece, But once that equipment is there, we have to have the people there in order to operate that equipment.
That's right. And Ms. Burton, I'm sure from the civilian side you have some things to add to that.
Absolutely. People is the Army priority. Are the Army priority? What is that, Hank? Right. Tell me, is it is or are?
Yeah, people are.
People are.
That's right.
There we go.
People are the Army's
are.
priority. And the Army People Strategy is just this wonderful document that lays out all of the initiatives and thoughts and our way forward to build this Army of 2028. And it's really exciting to see such an emphasis on people.
No, absolutely it is. Next question from the audience. Are the Guard and Reserve participating in talent management transformation? Sergeant Major, you know anything about that?
I'll say from the enlisted initiatives, every time we talk about talent management, we ensure that we have all three components in the room during the discussions, because a lot of things that we do with the active component can translate to the Guard and Reserves. Although we identify that there's some things that they will not be able to do based off of their work schedules and things like that. But at the end of the day, anything that we do can pretty much in some form translate to the other two components. So yes.
Well, I will say this. I know at least on the National Guard side, IPSA, we've just about finished implementing that across every single territory and state. 54.
We have 33 online.
We have 33 online. We're projecting end of March-ish sometime to have that online. First time ever. You took 54 different database systems and narrowed that down to one.
Right.
One record, one system, one soldier,
That's right.
one Army, whether it's AC, RC, doesn't matter. And I think that's just a more efficient way of doing things. Commanders will have the opportunity to sit there, pull up that dashboard once this is all implemented and say, okay, this is my formation and we're going to Africa. I need somebody in my ranks who has lived there maybe. Maybe they went to, their parents were diplomats, whatever the case may be, and they'll be able to see that. Right. And that gets to, well, how do they see that? And that gets to a question I was going to bring to you, sir. As you mentioned during the ATAP process, knowledge, skills, behaviors, and preferences, soldiers are going to have to start self-professing these types of things in these systems once they become more broadly available.
So we're in early days, but there's some key enablers that are going to move us down this road readily. One is technology, and a key piece is IPSA. So in our existing databases, there's not a lot there in the way of talent, right? It's 1,400 characters wide, and is where were you, what did you do sort of data.
And what rank are you?
Yeah, and what rank are you? And so very quickly we're working in a world now where there's a front side of, if you're an officer, your officer record brief or the corresponding document for our enlisted folks. And then there's a back side. The front side's more of the traditional information. The back side is free-flowing. Tell us about yourself. What are you reading? What are your hobbies? Where do you vacation? Do you have any interests abroad? You know, what is your dissertation on, if you wrote one? What was your degree in, and what areas did you like best? Who were your favorite professors? Anything and everything that you might think would make you of interest to whoever would want to hire you in the Army for a key position. Mm-hmm. How this looks on the hiring end, our battalion commanders and brigade commanders saw it this fall when they started hiring officers to join their formations. I saw it this spring, summer and fall, when we started hiring officers for our new Army Enterprise Marketing Office in Chicago.
That's right.
So a first example of how does this affect the Guard and Reserve would be we reached far and wide to find the right leader for that organization. Right. And we were looking for somebody with a lot of experience in the marketing arena and high-tech marketing, the digital aspects, statistical aspects, best practices. You can imagine we don't find a lot of those on active duty. We looked in the reserves and we found General Alex Fink, who is an Army Reserve officer who's serving as the leader of our total Army marketing effort. And so that kind of thing will become much more typical. We could reach in the Guard and Reserve to find that specific talent we might need for a while, for a minute, right, for a little longer.
Sure.
And we're very interested in getting that done. With IPSA, we're actually going to be able to do it now because we don't have all these different systems scattered across the 54 pieces of the Army. Mm-hmm. But we've got one unified database in which officers and enlisted folks will now be able to enter that information about what are they passionate about, what are their experiences, their skills, their knowledge, behaviors. And as we do assessment or learn, we'll be able to layer that in there as well from things like the Battalion Commander Assessment Program, Upstream events you'll start seeing at the ILE, Command and General Staff College, Company Commanders Course, Cadet Days, and corresponding experiences for our enlisted and warrant officer folks. So that'll start flowing in there because now there's a home for that kind of information.
That makes sense. Ms. Burton, I know on the civilian side, we're very familiar with USA Jobs. Not that I'm on there every day looking for another job, sir.
You're not, Hank?
Love working for you, love working for the G1. I'm not going anywhere.
Secret's out, Hank.
However, it behooves one to be familiar with systems that are out there.
Yes.
On the civilian side of things, besides USA Jobs, do we have anything maybe in the hopper like what we're talking about with IPSA?
Yes, yes, absolutely. In the near future, we will implement the Defense Civilian Human Resource Management System. That, again, is a first time ever where Department of Defense HR systems will all be on one platform. So we'll have one system. So we'll be able to move between components without reestablishing a record from scratch. We'll be able to see data across Department of Defense. It'll help us with our initiatives and also with placements.
I would imagine so.
So yeah, it's exciting.
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. I hope it gets easier.
Yeah.
That's the
Well,
key.
stay off USA Jobs, Hank.
I promise I won't go on today. Not after this. Makes me want to keep doing my job. All right, final question of the day. That's what they're telling me here. How do I know if I'm a good fit for the Army? You mentioned that a little bit earlier, sir.
Well, that's a key thing. I started thinking about the Army probably when I was about 4 or 5 years old. Other people may have started thinking later in life or even earlier, right? So it's important to be in young folks' decision space sort of as early as we can be there, because most people have 7 or 8 things they're thinking of doing with their life. We want to be one of those things. Now, as they start thinking about it, they ought to think about fit. Are they a good fit for the Army, and is the Army a good fit for them? Because if it is a good fit, they're going to find this is a great place to be. It's going to be exciting work. It's going to be very fulfilling because they're in service of others. So how do they know about that fit? Well, we've got recruiters who can help with that, but they're kind of late in the game. We've got JROTC. We're in about 10% of the high schools in the United States, and we've been in a lot of discussions with our folks out at ROTC and JROTC about how we might reform and modernize some of that. We've got our CASAs across the country, the civilian aides, the secretaries of the Army, who are talking in communities about what it is to be in the Army. And so it's important for all these folks to know what is the Army like today. And so having current information is key, because we are the ambassadors for the Army. If you've been in the Army, or you're near the Army, you're a friend of the Army, you're an ambassador. And having good information is really important to help that young adult evaluate that fit. The chances of good fit are very high. We've got about 150 ways to be a soldier.
True.
From cyber to flying right out of high school. Great opportunities. And so talking about those is General Fink's job. He does the inform and help build preference, help identify fit. He's the marketing end of this business. Junior ROTC is educate and inspire to service. The recruiters are the folks who can talk in detail about opportunities and fit and the benefits. And then, of course, everyone that's in the Army, whether they're a spouse, a child, a service member, or a soldier for life, can talk about the good days in the Army. We all have our war stories.
Sure.
So if you're sharing a war story, share one that's a very positive one too, because the vast majority of them probably are. Not every day did you have a cold meal, or
Sure.
or the gear wasn't just quite right. So think about those good times.
Sergeant Major, anything from your foxhole on what makes someone a good fit? I mean, former recruiter here, I have some ideas, but I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, I think everything that Dr. Wardynski said is definitely spot on, but the most important thing that I gather out of that is get the information. First, do your research. I mean, just asking the question first off, it shows that you have some interest and you're asking the question. But then once you get that information, you have to match yourself up with that. Some things that I look at when I talk to people when I go back home on leave and things like that is motivation, being a self-starter, willing to learn, because you're going to do all that in the Army. And then can you mesh well with the team, because everything that we do is about teamwork, and it takes a team to accomplish the mission. So that's just my opinion on it.
Absolutely. Ms. Burton, on the civilian side, of course, how am I a good fit to be an Army civilian?
It's absolutely the same. We want to start talking to people. In high school, I started thinking about being an Army civilian. When I was in middle school, I worked for the government part-time while I was going to college. I entered one of those intern programs. It's exactly the same. Do your research, think about what you want to do. If you want to be a part of a team that's going places, that's innovative, that's cutting edge, the Army's for you. But do your research.
Absolutely. Well, the three of you, I can't thank you enough for joining me this afternoon here on the stage. I want to make sure that we thank the fine folks in OCPA, the Office of the Chief of Public Affairs, and the great folks in Army Television for providing the facility for us to have this conversation here on Facebook Live. So for Dr. Casey Wardynski, Ms. Carol Burton, and Sergeant Major Wardell Jefferson from the Pentagon, I'm Hank Manitrez. Thank you for joining us.